Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Sd.Kfz 10 half-track. This might come as a surprise to you, but this is a Rubicon Models plastic kit in 28mm scale.
That's not a surprise, we can see it on the box!
Yes, I was being funny by stating the opposite of what is true. Ha 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 ha, we all say. The back of the box is consistent with other Rubicon kits. There's a basic painting guide, an image of the included decal sheet, and some paragraphs of information about the vehicle. It mentions the main role of these half-tracks is towing guns, like the Flak 30. This vehicle can also be built to mount the Flak 30 on the back, though the gun itself is sold separately. And since I have two of these, I'm going to build both variants. But before that, let's have a look at what's in the box. It's sprues! 3 of them, all moulded in a nice grey plastic. The parts here are up to the standard I would expect from Rubicon, which is to say a high standard. They're very well moulded and free from any obvious errors or defects, and I do try to find these things. Unfortunately, the first one of these kits arrived damaged, and I do have to say that I'm very appreciative of Rubicon for not only replacing the damaged models I got, but also for doing so very quickly. It lets me know that Rubicon is a company that cares about their products. I don't know if they're watching, but thank you Rubicon, you get a hearty thumbs up from me. So now I can build both versions of the vehicle. They're both pretty much the same, except for the rear part of the half-track, which makes sense really. You get enough parts in one kit to build it one way or the other, but you could probably do some magnetization tricks to be able to field both. Though there are some minor differences at the front of the vehicle too, so it might not be super accurate, but if you wanted, you could do that sort of thing. I might be getting a bit off track. The important thing is the parts here are quite nice and neat, and the detail is very good. Mold lines are minimal, though, as always, they are present, but you shouldn't have to spend a lot of time dealing with them. The decal sheet includes a lot of markings, though they are mostly license plates. This is labelled German Half-Tracks No. 2, so I would guess it's more generic half-track markings than specific to this vehicle, but there is a lot of choice and Rubicon's decals are pretty good, as are their instruction booklets. The instructions are well laid out in a way that makes sense. There isn't too much information in each step, and they make sure to point out when things should be done first or last or which parts are optional, and all of that sort of thing. Good instructions. Let us now use these instructions to glue some bits of plastic together in order to, hopefully, form an Sd.Kfz 10 half-track, and an Sd.Kfz 10/4. Man, that's a name that just rolls right off the tongue, isn't it?
No!
You're right, it's not. Anyway, we start with the tracks, and to start the tracks, we begin with this lower hull side part, which has final drive and suspension arm details moulded into it. Onto that, I glue this set of 3 road wheels, making sure to put them around the right way. The more detailed side should be facing inward like so. If they're going to be seen, it'll be from the underside of the vehicle. Then I add the tracks, which also have some road wheels moulded into them. The more solid looking wheel here is the drive sprocket, and this should be toward the front. Simple enough. The track set is completed by gluing these 3 individual road wheels into place. This isn't quite as simple as if they were a single piece track, but it's almost as easy, and it looks really good. There's a lot of 3-dimensionality here that would be harder to produce in a single part. And obviously there's one of these for either side, so that's 2 sets of tracks we have to make.
Thanks, Captain Obvious!
You're welcome. Next, I glue this rear plate into place. This has mudguards moulded into it, and it's quite easy to get the positioning of this due to its shape. The towing hitch comes next, and this simply drops into place in what I think is a rather obvious mounting point for it. You do get the choice of 2 mounting hitches. The one I've used here, which is the more detailed version, though I'm not so sure about the solid flat bits between the rods on it. Probably not describing that very well, but maybe you can see what I mean. The other option is a more simple, functional hitch with a pin you can connect a trailer to. The Flak 30 kit from Rubicon does come with a trailer, and I used that hitch when I did the basic assembly of the gun version of the half-track. Next, I install the front axle part. It seems like it would be pretty hard to install this wrong, though maybe you could put it on upside down. Don't though, it'll result in chaos and death and destruction and upside down wheels. You don't want that. Next, I glue in the cab interior part with the seats and such. There is a bit of keying in the bottom of the hull, so you don't go putting this on backwards. That would also cause chaos and death and such. I guess it makes sense to follow this with what seems to be a gear shifter and handbrake all in one part. How convenient. This more or less just drops right into place. Headlamps are next, and you get the choice between regular headlamps and the ones I've chosen with the blackout covers. I like these because they're a bit more war-like, I guess. They look more appropriate for a wartime vehicle, and they're also a bit less effort to paint. These are keyed, but there was a fair bit of play in them, so I had to do a fair bit of nudging to get them to sit how I wanted, and they're still not perfect, but they do have character. That's what we're calling it. A convoy light comes next, for when we've got ourselves a great big convoy rocking through the night, and this mounts into that square thing with the hole in it on the vehicle's front left fender. Next, this box. I think it probably holds some sort of equipment.
Oh, really, genius?
It goes here on the left between the fenders, and you might need to apply a little pressure to get it to sit right. Why not give that a lid? Is this a lid? Is this an open-y box or just a solid box that has equipment in it? Who knows? Probably a few people really, but not me. There's a different part to use here if you're building the Sd.Kfz 10/4, which is the gun-carrying version of course. I follow this with the front of the cab, I guess you might call it, the part with the dashboard and various mirrors and stuff. It's pretty easy to get the position of this right, it pretty much just slots right in. Next, why not add a shovel? Even German half-track crews love digging, I assume. This part is fairly simple to get into place. Next, the width marker ball-on-stick things, which probably have a proper name, which is not ball-on-a-stick thing. These have a fair bit of play to them, so I did my best to nudge them around such that they're at least consistent with each other. They might be at a historically inaccurate angle though. How could you? I know, I'm a monster. Next, on the right hand side, a stowage box. I'm assuming that this is one of the many places the crew can store their sauerkraut. Now that the crew can store sauerkraut, they're going to want to steer their half-tracks towards it. The steering column goes in fairly easily, and then, on top of that, we, unsurprisingly, install a steering wheel, which, when you think about it, really makes sense. The wheel took a bit of nudging, but it's not too hard to get it to sit properly. Next, I install a set of tools on the front right fender. It seemed a bit weird to me to be adding all of this stuff around the engine area before adding the hood parts, or depending on where you're from, the bonnet parts, which is what I install next. I did ponder if it might be a bit easier to install the hood before any of the other stuff around it, but maybe not. I did have two of this kit and I could have experimented, but I didn't. I built it as the instructions instructed, and it wasn't particularly difficult to do, though you might find tweezers to be helpful. The two halves of the hood kind of overlap, so you'll have to put the right side on first. It's a little fiddly, mostly because I was trying to avoid breaking the width guide things, or knocking any of the other bits out of place. It seemed like a pretty reasonable idea to put the front radiatory bit on next, and it is. So I did that. I did have to apply a fair bit of pressure to reduce the gaps to an acceptable size here, and I think it's ended up looking pretty good. The front of the half-track is mostly done, so let's pay a bit of attention to the rear. This is the rear section of the regular half-track, and there's a different one for the gun version. There are some holes to drill here, but only if you want to mount the optional stowage parts. There are other stowage parts to use if you don't want to do this. They're racks into which you can put some jerry cans. Drilling holes is obviously easy, just make sure that you've made the holes big enough before you try to glue the parts into place. Next, I glue that rear compartment into place, which is rather simple. Use enough glue that the glue god will smile upon you, some pressure, and everything should be fine and dandy. Then I add these little doors. Are they doors? They're little bits that go where you might put doors. Maybe they're just boards to stop water from getting in or something like that. Either way, they're actually kind of annoying to get into place. It might have been a bit easier to do this before putting the rear compartment on. I'm not sure. I did have to do a little bit of trimming of these parts before they would go into place, and they still resisted my efforts a bit, but I did eventually get them on. I then installed the stowage. These are the optional parts that I drilled the holes for just before. If you didn't do that step, you could install some nice racks here. At the rear, we put these jerry cans with their own little racks. If you didn't drill the holes, I guess you would just put nothing here. These jerry cans are pretty simple to put on, though you might need to do a bit of nudging to make sure they're sitting nice and vertical and not at some weird angle. On the rear plate, I glue this axe. This has nothing to guide it, but it's easy enough to eyeball the positioning. Please insert hilarious joke about axing a question here. Inside the passenger compartment, I guess you might call it, we add this wall stowage box thingo, and it pretty much just drops right into place. This was the test fit, and it worked so well I just added glue. Because I'm using an extra thin glue, specifically SMS extra thin, this will just seep in between the joints and form a nice bond. On top of that thing, I glue its top on. This is just as simple as it looks, which is of course very, very simple. The windscreen goes into place next, and there's no glazing for this, but I'm sure you could add some if you really felt the need. You would have seen the canvas cover for this on the sprues, which does look pretty good, and it can be modelled up or down. I've chosen down, so I assembled a folded down cover. It's pretty simple, just make sure you've got the little rod bits around the right way. I set that aside to bond, and then, finally, I add the tracks. This is, unsurprisingly, really easy. The bit at the front is shaped such that it should be quite obvious if you've got this on wrong. The front wheels come next, and as you can see, these have a D-shaped keying. This is because the bottom of the wheels are slightly flattened to represent the half-track's weight. It's very, very subtle here, but it is there. The folded down roof goes on next, at the rear, which is simple enough, though you might need to press the little rod bits inwards so they're against the hull. And that's the Sd.Kfz 10 half-track completed. We'll have a look at it on the Spinny Boy soon, but first, I'm going to show you how the Sd.Kfz 10/4 goes together. Here's the underside. You can see there are guides for holes here, and for this variant, you'll need to drill those out. I suspect the reason the tracks go on so late in the build is to make it possible to drill these out. You would certainly have some difficulty if the tracks were in place. It's probably obvious, but the build up until this point is exactly the same as for the regular half-track. And here is the rear gun mounting platform thing. I forgot to video myself actually installing this, so it's already on, but I don't suppose that matters too much. You're not really missing much by not seeing me put it in place. Over the front fenders, I install these nice racks. These are for rifles, which, as you can see, are already in the racks. The one on the right side was a little bit fiddly to get into place, especially if, like me, you are trying to avoid damaging the ball-on-stick thing, but they do go on, and I think they add a lot of interest. They might make it a bit more fiddly to paint, but that's yet another thing for future Herbert to worry about. Next, we put together this thing, which I have no idea what it is, but it's comprised of these two plates, which have keying to make things easy. Then we slide two rack bits over each end, obviously making sure that everything is around the right way, and this is pretty easy. This bar that goes over the front of it is a bit more fiddly, but nothing too challenging. Once that's all together, this whatever it is mounts onto the front of the half-track like so. It did need a bit of kajiggering, but it looks pretty good once it's on. Here we have the fold-down wall bits, and onto these we have to glue these things. I don't know what they are. Maybe they're magazine holders? Not for reading material magazines, but shooty bullet magazines. Or maybe they're sauerkraut containers, for easy sauerkraut access. Whatever they are, they go onto these wall bits. Refer to the instructions to determine their orientation on each part. The lip on these parts should sort of sit up on top of the wall parts. The rear wall and floor part is similar, just that the parts kind of face different ways to each other. I put those aside and install whatever these are. These are, clearly, what we had to drill those holes out for earlier. The holes I made weren't quite the right size, and that did cause me to have to kajigger and fiddle around with stuff a bit more than I probably really should have, but eventually I got both of these parts on. After those are on, this middle bit goes into place. It just needs a little bit of fiddling to get the ends of the bar to link into the vertical things on the side parts. As I said, I've got no idea what this is, but it's on, so hooray! Next, the floor wall bits. I don't know what to call them, they're both floor and wall. They go on next, and obviously you can model them up or down. There shouldn't be any trouble getting the flak 30 into place if you choose to model the sides up, but I've chosen down anyway. I just like that when it's folded down, it looks ready for some plane shooting action. Unsurprisingly, the rear part goes on as well. You may need to hold these parts in place for a moment or two while the glue does its thing, but it's pretty easy to do this. There are also some rounded cornery bits, so the gun crew finds it a bit harder to fall off the platform, and these more or less just drop right into place, but it does look kind of fancy. And that's it for the Sd.Kfz 10/4. There is a little bit less to it compared to the other variant. That is, of course, until you put the flak 30 on the back of it, but I'll be doing that in another video. This one is already long enough. So, obviously, the Sd.Kfz 10 and /4 variant, those names certainly do not roll off the tongue, and I kind of wish they had a cooler name. Anyway, this 28mm scale plastic kit from Rubicon Models is now completed. I'm quite happy with the result. I feel like this is a less commonly seen half-track. We're kind of used to seeing the Sd.Kfz 251s, so it's nice to see something different. I'm not entirely sure which guns this thing would tow. I mean, the flak 30, it mentions that on the box. Other than that though, I'm not really sure. But probably not an 88mm. I will be mounting the Rubicon flak 30 to the back of this, obviously the appropriate model. It would be kind of silly to put it on the regular half-track version, and because of this it won't be towing the gun on a trailer, but you can still make an ammo trailer, which the half-track can then tow instead of the gun. And on the gun variant you can probably see the simplified, more toy-like towing hitch. It is kind of hidden by the fold-down deck. Obviously I'm not doing that in this video, but it will be along soon enough. Everything's built and recorded, it's just a matter of editing. I'm clearly no half-trackologist, but I would say the detail in this kit is pretty convincing. There might be some simplification or omissions, but I don't think that's a big issue. And if you are looking for a super detailed display kit, you'd probably be looking elsewhere anyway. Unless you're doing it wrong, I guess. It looks pretty good, is what I'm trying to get at. Rubicon's newer stuff, which this kind of is just getting better and better, and they did start out pretty good. I'm always excited to see what they'll do next. Okay, that may well be just enough waffling. Keep an eye out for the Rubicon flak 30 video, probably not next week, but pretty soon. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you want to watch me build kits like this live on stream, drop on by my Twitch channel, which, strangely enough, is where I do my streaming. There's a link in the description below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube? It's free, and that's a really low price. Or if you've got the means and you want to help a Herbert Erpaderp do Herbert Erpaderp things, as well as see my videos a bit early, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all my other things like Discord or social media in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other, have a nice day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.